Alright, hi there. Just a couple of points I want to bring up that we've run into so far. I think everything's going pretty well. Again, questions, comments, problems, make sure you email and don't wait till the last minute. Um, but I think you're all doing very well. You seem to be grasping what we've done so far. I just want to take some time to point out some things that aren't in the book right now that will help us with placing objects on the screen. A year or so ago, Corona updated and they changed their whole graphics system. This is for the better, and it's based on the newer devices that have higher pixels per screen and high definition resolutions and things like that that simply weren't there before. It was a change that was necessary. However, this also caused some problems with the way things had been done in the past. By devices packing more pixels into the same size space, it changed the idea of where on the screen you were going to place something. What used to be located at 50 pixels now would be found at 25, and so on. So they tried to make a more uniform system that would scale to the devices with the higher resolutions, and they called this change Graphics 2.0. Now, one of the biggest changes for us is that they changed the placement point of screen objects. Okay, and I'm going to show you what I mean by that right now. Okay, so here I have a little bit of code. I'm hiding my status bar as we normally do, and I've created some text. I've created a background image and a couple of other images that I'm loading in. You can see by these coordinates here at the end, for each one, I am placing them at a specific location on my screen. Okay, so I type up my main.lua. I have all of my files in the same folder, which is again is a rule. I go through and I make sure that when I'm loading the file names, I match exactly. So, for example, this file called redflask1.png, the word red is all in caps, everything else is lowercase. When I look over here in my folder, I see that that matches up exactly as I typed it. This is important, and I know several of you are working in Windows, and Windows has a little bit of leeway here in which if the first letter is capital or lowercase, it will not cause an error. But this is something on the Mac side, and when you go to build for a device, this will kick out. So we want to make sure we start doing that right at the beginning so that as we go through it becomes almost second nature. We match exactly our file names that we're going to call in with how we type them in our code. Okay, so here I have it. I create it, I save it, and I'm just going to do a Command S. That will load it in my simulator. Oh, and lo and behold, things do not look right. Okay, and that's because, again, the insertion point has changed. Early on, that was set to the upper left-hand corner of any object. So if you place something at 50-50, the upper left-hand corner of that object would be at that point. Now, the insertion point is midway or halfway per object. So I'm really seeing part of my background wall here because it's off the screen because the insertion point is half of it. Half of its width, half of its height. So obviously that doesn't work. Now I could go into my code and through some trial and error I could say, oh okay, let's try placing that at 200, 200, and oh, more of my wall is visible, and through repeated trial and error I could place this. And this is what several of you were doing in your other code, which will work, but it becomes a bit tedious, especially if you end up, in a program with lots of objects on your screen. So we're going to look at, a better way to do this. So I'm going to go back to my code and take this out. And we have something called Sorry about that. Anchor points. Okay, so we can set a property for our display objects, so we will change that insertion point. Personally, I don't know if it's because I learned with it in the upper left or that just makes more sense to me. I don't know, but I just can't get used to this. So one of the first things I do when I write a new program is I change the insertion points or anchors back to the way it was. Okay, but you can adjust this any way that you want with a range of 0 to 1. 1 being the upper right hand corner, 0 being the upper left hand corner, and 0.5 being in the center. So, like if I were making an app that involved rotating an object, I don't have to rotate from the center. I can change this, because this anchor point not only is where it places it, but if we do a rotation command, that's the rotation point also. So that can help us a little bit. So here's how we do it. We just take the object name dot anchor x and we set it equal to whatever we want it to be. 0, 0 for x and y, we'll put it back to the upper left. And again here I'm just using a generic. It would be whatever you call your specific item. Okay, so if I go back to my code for a minute and say, oh, okay, bg dot anchor x equals 0, bg dot anchor y equals 0, and save this. Now when I look at my simulator, oh, my graphic covers the entire screen because it's placed from the corner, and that allows me to line my graphics up with the resolution of my device. Okay. Now even in this one you can see I have 6 items. To go through and put the anchor points in for all of them is going to take me a little bit of time. So there are instances when you're going to want that anchor point to be 0 for everything. So there is a default command that we can use. So if we want to use the whole thing, here we go. It is just display.setDefault and then for x and y. Okay, because we can adjust that point anywhere we want. Okay, so let me go back to my code up here. Now, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to place these lines before I load in anything else. So they are in effect before any of these things are called in. Remember how Corona interprets your code from top down unless we break out of that. So by putting it near the beginning, I'm sure that all of my screen objects will follow that rule. So here we go, I save it, go back to my simulator and look, and now my other items are placed a little bit better. I have my table, it's closer to the floor, although not exact. I could tinker with this just a little bit. Let me just change that to 470, see what happens there. Yeah, there we go. And my flasks, my potion bottles are floating in the air. So what I can do there is just, again, with a little trial and error. Oh, too much. I can make sure they line up pretty close to the tabletop. Now, if I remember the graphics, and I know this course isn't about graphics, but if I know the size of my images, I can just use simple math to place them. That's close enough. You get the idea. Alright, so again, this is really the focus, and it probably took way too long to explain that, but by setting that, it makes it easier to place our graphics. As we move into groups and using sprites and multiple frames for our images, this becomes more important because alignment becomes one of our major focuses. Alright, thanks for giving me your time. Again, email or post in the discussion board if you have any questions or issues during your code this week, and happy coding.